Setting those expectations up front but giving them direction, I think, is key as well. Not just setting the expectation, but letting them know where the company is going, how they fit into it. I've seen some companies do a really good job with creating job descriptions, and then other companies that are not so great at it, but they still have success. And part of that is, I think, job descriptions help you. It's the advertisement, it's the setting the foundation. This is the job that you're applying for. And then when you come on board, this is the job that you have, but it's the follow-up after that. What happens after that when they're on your team, and how do we make that be as successful as possible?
Measuring the right thing also starts with understanding what impact that role has in the company. One of the hardest things to do, I believe, is to measure impact, to measure the amount of trust either built or lost with a client through an interaction, through a process, through a period of time.
Welcome to the Property Management Success Podcast, where we interview leaders in the industry to uncover the secrets to profitability, efficiency, and achieving true freedom, whether it's your time, money, or lifestyle. I'm your host, Tony Klein, and I'm here to help you build a wildly successful property management business. Let's get to it. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Tony, what's going on?
Hey, man. Welcome to another episode of the Property Management Aid Station. And really glad we landed on that name. It really fits us. And I'm excited to kind of mix property management and the other favorite topic of mine is trail running. So we'll get to dabble and dribble that in. So let's jump into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So we were talking just a little bit before we hit record, and we were talking about teams and how that solo entrepreneur evolves from being the one that does everything themselves to hiring somebody else, trusting somebody else, delegating, and how they actually go about making all of that come together. And so it's a big topic. There's a lot of people that are in that transition period, and a lot of people kind of get to that plateau, that solo entrepreneur. They're doing it themselves. They know they need help, but they can't hire anybody because they didn't start with that foundation of this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is how we do it. And so to stop and train somebody actually puts them further behind. So they just keep carrying that load because they're afraid to take the time to pull over and put somebody else in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. And sometimes when they pull over and put somebody else in the driver's seat, it backfires. And it's like, why did I waste my time doing that? It just came back to me anyway.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because a lot of times if we don't plan properly to put somebody in that role, we go out, we interview, and then we find somebody that just fits the role. Essentially, they have a pulse, and we force fit them into the role, right? It's somebody that showed up, they were smiling, and we just say, this will do, and we put them in that role, and we kind of check it off. We say, we're done, we've hired somebody, now I can go focus on other things. And they don't do the training to get that person up to speed. So after 2, 3, 4 months, they both know it's not working, and they pretend that it's working for as long as they can both sort of hold their breaths. And at some point somebody gives, and either the person quits because it's not the job they thought, it's not as structured as they thought, they don't have as much guidance or leadership as they thought, or the entrepreneur fires them because they're not getting the result that they expected to get by investing in that person and having that additional expense. So it's a great point.
Yeah, there's a little crossover here with ultra trail running. Not a perfect analogy, but you and I both know when we run really long races, we get to take what's called a pacer with us. And if that pacer hasn't, maybe they join you for 20 miles of that race or 50 miles of that race. If that pacer hasn't been doing the training, they're not going to be able to stay with us and give us the support we need in that long trail race. So, when you were talking just now, I was thinking if all we had to do as entrepreneurs is spend time finding, recruiting, and hiring people to do jobs for us, and those jobs went beautifully, smoothly all the time, then business would be a cakewalk. That's all we would do is just spend our time recruiting people. And but the harder lift is having the tools, the foundation, the for them to be the system to come in and be successful in, and then give them the level of support and training so they can keep up with us and they can provide us the support we need.
And to kind of build on what you were talking about with the pacer, I've had some great pacers and I've had some pacers that weren't so great. But when I look back at it, it wasn't the pacer's fault most of the time. It was my fault because I didn't set those proper expectations. I didn't set when you join the team, when you're out on the trail with me, this is what I need from you. And this is how we're going to determine whether or not that's successful. And on the really long races, I have different pacers for different things. Some where I know it's going to be going through the night and I need somebody that's going to be fun and energetic and bring a different perspective. And then in other times, I need people who are really good at navigation. And it's the same thing with business. A lot of times we'll bring somebody onto our team and we're not clear about what we need from them. And so they think they're doing an okay job. We never give them direct feedback. And so, if we were to bring this back to property management or frankly any business, how would you go about setting up somebody's first, say, 30 days or 60 days to be successful when they join the team? What would you do for a new employee or what do you do?
Well, I have a couple thoughts. Let's start with a big failure of mine recent, not a huge failure, but a failure of mine in this regard recently. A few months ago, we hired two new maintenance coordinators, both from Mexico. Fantastic team members. English was wonderful, intelligent, experienced. We found them through a well-known platform online that caters to our industry. And we were busy doing other things. I was hiring other property managers. I was actually hiring for my business development manager spot and going through a recent software change from Rent Manager to Rentvine. So we had a lot of things going, and the training and the support for these maintenance coordinators fell off. And um, ultimately resulted in what I believe was these maintenance coordinators got another job because we saw the responsiveness fall off significantly. And I hold myself responsible. And so I had to let them go. I let them go last week. And now we've got two new maintenance coordinators. So I'm doing this all over again. It's like, man, if I could just stop starting over, we'd get some momentum here. But every time we do this, I learn something more about the onboarding. That first 30 days, Tony, is so critical, so vital, right? To set things in motion. If people join our teams without the proper expectations, guidance, and support, and then enough time goes by, what we've communicated to them is you do this your way and you do this on your terms, and nobody's double checking anything. And this is the relationship we have. That's on me. That's on me.
Yeah, setting those expectations up front and but giving them direction, I think is key as well, not just setting the expectation, but letting them know where the company is going, how they fit into it. Um, I've seen some companies do a really good job with creating job descriptions, and then other companies that are not so great at it, but they still have success. And part of that is, I think, job descriptions help you. It's the advertisement, it's the setting, the foundation. This is the job that you're applying for. And then when you come on board, this is the job that you have. But it's the follow up after that. What happens after that when they're on your team? And how do we make that be as successful as possible? And I have a couple of ideas that I've seen work. But when you're bringing somebody on, a lot of times, like I said before, people just check the box. I want to get back to doing what I was doing. So I hire somebody, I check the box, and then I go back to what I was doing. And I think that's a big mistake. There's different ways to run a business. There's different people have different opinions. Some are real touchy feely, some are, not, some are in the fluffy, gooey, core values, mission, vision. Others are just about, hey, come in and this is the process, work your process. But for me, it's really about indoctrinating them into your culture. I think if you can get them to have a good culture fit, I think that that goes a long way to putting gas in the tank to get that employee, that new team member where they need to go down the road.
Absolutely. We've had other conversations about vision and what a powerful um, unifying force a vision can have across all team members, remote and local. And closely tied with vision, in my opinion, is the undergirding of the values and the principles. Like if we can find smart people that are that that coincide with values, we should have diversity of thought. We should not have diversity in values. Values
Mhm.
have to be on point. And then if we can identify the principles behind the decisions we make, then that gives somebody a foundation to make impact. And there's a difference between impact. There's a difference between thinking about making a certain impact and just getting tasks done. And sometimes I see a disconnect there when we're hiring team members. It's like, okay, here's how you do these tasks, but they're unaware of the impact that they need to make at the end of the day. And the market pays for impact. It doesn't pay for tasks. The market pays for results. It doesn't pay for time.
Yeah. I love that a lot. Getting people to recognize the difference and have that be a part of their culture and their role at your company. I want to take our listeners through a little bit of a journey because I'm imagining that most of the entrepreneurs that are listening to this haven't they haven't gone through a job application recently. They haven't been on the other side. I mean, I don't know the last time you did a job interview, but for me, it was back in 1992. So it's been a long time. And, if you flip the roles, you've got somebody that comes in, interviews, whether it's online or, in person, they come in, they sit through that interview. They've got some interest in the position. You've got some interest in them. They go home and they tell their family or their friends, I like this job. I hope I get it. It looks like a good company. It looks like it's a good fit for me. And they go home and they tell their friends that. And then they wait to hear back from you. Maybe they come in for a second or third interview, whatever it is. But the longer that goes, if they wind up being your choice, the more anticipation and excitement builds for them. And then they start the first day and you get to decide, do you build on that or do you pop that balloon and start over at zero? And a lot of times when somebody starts, their training program is, well, shadow so and so, just kind of follow them around and see what they're doing because people don't have a good training program. And depends on who they shadow, right? If that person doesn't have a good attitude, cuts corners, doesn't fill out reports right, whatever it is, they start picking up those bad habits. And that person that spends that first week in your company, they're now deciding, do I build on that momentum and excitement I had, or was it all a sham? And did I get something pulled over on me? And I don't think as entrepreneurs, I don't think we do that on purpose, but I think we do it more than we know that we do it.
Absolutely.
So how do we not do that? What would a good first week look like for a team member? What do you have or what have you seen? And I'll kind of share with you what I've seen as well.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, part of let me back up. We finally created a couple years ago, or last year, we created a new team member onboarding process in Lead Simple. So we standardized the process. One of the steps in that process is that within the first week, they meet with me for a vision, mission, values conversation. And that's really important for me, to ground this new person in, here's who we are, here's what we stand for, this is the impact we want to make. Um, And then so I think that's really important. The other thing that comes to mind is a direct point of contact with a manager or a trainer and really tight feedback loops in the beginning, right? Um, Vern Harnish wrote a book called Scaling Up, and it says the best company, one of the quotes was, is the best companies are not the best companies by mistake. They have the right routines. What are the routines you have in place? And those really short feedback loops when someone is new to the team, I think is vital because there's so many different directions things can go. And eventually they don't need so much of this keeping them on the right path, but in the beginning, it needs more, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What I've seen be really successful is somebody starts, and for the first 2 days, their job is first they read the core values. That shouldn't take a long time to just read them, but they read the core values, they read the mission statement, they read the vision statement, they read and study your target client so they know this is who we're trying to serve in this business. This is the way we're trying to serve them. These are the values we have when we're trying to serve them. And then, and this is where a lot of companies don't actually have this, but they focus on these are our policies, or what I call in my company, the rules of winning in property management at our company. This is the policies we have. They're not going to remember how we do all of these things. That's the processes. We'll get to that. But they spend the first 2 days just going through that documentation and reading all of our policies, what we do and why we do it. Then later on, we can focus on how to do it. But they get a big picture overview of sort of the life cycle of a client journey, a tenant journey, a vendor journey, and they just really get that over overall picture of what's going on in the company.
I love that.
Then once they
Start with the big
understand that
picture.
overall, yeah, once they understand that overall picture, then they can start saying, how do I fit into that? What's my role? And I think a mistake that a lot of companies make is they just hire somebody, and if they do training for them, it's specific for their role, and they don't understand how their role fits into the whole picture. Right. So when it comes to dispatching maintenance or processing applications or any number of things, they see what their job is, but they don't see the impact, as you had mentioned, the impact. They don't see how, if they fall behind, how it throws off the rest of the team. They may think, well, it just takes me an extra day or two to process this application, but that throws off everything down the chain. And so starting with the core components I talked about plus the policies, it just helps them understand more. And I think it makes them feel like they're a part of the team. They get where they fit.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we have to give the vision, the perspective of how they fit into the overall picture, how they make impact, in order for them to understand why they're doing what they're doing and to have the awareness that, hey, if something doesn't go quite right or something's slightly out of the box, here are the other things that it touches. And we've got to get to that big picture mission. I've got to be part of that big picture impact no matter what.
Mhm. Yeah. So, Mark, in your company, do you guys manage by a set of KPIs or OKRs or some sort of metrics that you can determine is each position performing? Or um, I'll just a confession of mine, the first, say, 10 years, maybe 11 years of being in business. And we were just lucky if the rents went in the right accounts. Like, we were not we we were good with other people's money, and we were good with lead-based paint, and we were good with fair housing. But outside of that, and we were just kind of making it up as we went. And to track any kind of KPIs, I didn't even know what that was. I just we were if we made it through the week, it was a good week. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
do you guys use KPIs now? What was that transition like? If you did, and if you don't, why not?
So, I was on a or I listened to a podcast recently by Matthew Whitaker where he talked about he uses the EOS system, the Entrepreneur Operating System, and every person in his organization, at least in his home office, has one number that they not only
Mm.
know what that number is all the time, but they're strictly accountable for that one number. I really like that idea. I don't think so. We're refining the numbers right now by role. One of my challenges as kind of a more creative visionary leader is I've resisted structure, but now that we're over 600 units, more and more structure is necessary to allow us to continue growing and scaling. So, for instance, I resisted, I pushed back. Maybe I'm a use case of what not to do. I would push back on the idea of really specific roles because one of my core values is extreme ownership. And I never wanted to hear from anybody ever, that's not my job. That just grates on me. So,
Yeah.
so we would have these general roles and we would measure what needed to get done. We know that we need to run the property like a business. So the vacancy loss needs to be a minimum. That's an impact. Whatever needs to happen with turning the property, marketing the property, leasing the property to minimize vacancy loss, that's really important. In addition to that, I think that another major impact is people need to be thrilled with our service, residents and owners alike. So we're very careful about measuring how people feel about us, customer satisfaction scores, net promoter scores, and how fast we're responding to emails and what percentage of phone calls we answer live within the first 10 seconds. We have that data. And those few things I just mentioned, if we're hitting on all cylinders operationally, and we're making sure that we're not losing the owner's money, that we're generating more money, and we're thrilling people with great communication and intelligent responses. I mean, those are the things I've been looking at really carefully. But we're going to get a little bit more granular now that we've grown, and we're gonna empower each team member to own their one, two, or three numbers to make sure that we can continue scaling.
So one of the things that we used to say at our company was if everybody owns something, nobody owns it.
Yep.
And so if everybody owns the responsibility of keeping vacancy low or whatever, everybody should have the responsibility of making sure that it it's low, but somebody, in my opinion, somebody needs to actually own that outcome and be responsible for making
One
sure that if they
person.
need one person, and if other people on the team, they may need other people's help. You mentioned EOS, and EOS, they talk about your quarterly rocks, and that just means your big project. What's your big project? Somebody has to own the outcome of that project, but they don't need to do all the work. They need to be the coordinator, facilitator, gatherer of information or whatever, but they can still call on the rest of the team to help. And so, uh, one of the differences between what you're saying and what we used to do and what I've seen is that it's everybody should have the attitude if there's trash in the parking lot, you pick up the trash, right? But somebody should have the responsibility to make sure that it's done, right? It should still fall on somebody. And that's one of the things that we've gotten really focused on with our consulting program is consulting people to find the right KPIs. You had mentioned you want to give people that one thing or one, two, or three. We've kind of found the sweet spot of being like 3 to 5 numbers, 3 to 5 KPIs per person. Any more than that, it's just you start tracking busy work. Any less than that, you may not be getting the full measure of what the team member needs to do to be successful. So that's kind of the sweet spot. But I'm interested to see what you roll out or what you've put in place with that 1 to 3 and how that might differ from 3 to 5.
Absolutely. The other thing I've started working on is a chart that shows by role the most significant impacts that those individuals have. Because to your point earlier, in fact, I'm trying to impact of each role. For instance, field tech, they're either increasing revenue, decreasing expenses, or they're increasing trust. Those, to me, those are the three things. Like, we're running someone's business, and we all benefit if there's a high trust relationship with owners, residents, and vendors. So how does each role impact increasing revenue for the owner, decreasing expenses for the owner, and increasing trust? So for instance, the field tech needs to influence the client to make smart investments in their property. So that increases revenue both for Mark Brower Properties and for the owner.
Mhm.
Faster lease ups, higher rents, decreases churn by lowering future stress of being a landlord because we have a higher quality, better functioning property. So yeah, to your point, I think having two, you say 3 to 5, we're thinking 1 to 3. There's no perfect answer here. Having those KPIs that someone owns all the time. So that field tech, um, it might be, how fast are they getting out to the property after it's vacant, and how fast are they getting that report back? And when the reports are audited, how often are they, error free and really detailed, something like that, right?
Yeah. And I think it's really important. The two things about tracking your KPIs. So we call it a scoreboard. Other people call it a scorecard. Other people just call it your metrics. So whatever you call it. But on our scoreboard, we we need to do two things. We need to track the right things, but we also need to track the right language on the right things. And we need to phrase it correctly so that we're tracking not just the right metric, but did we actually meet it? So an example of that would be lease renewals. So let's say in a company we set a standard that we need to do 10 lease renewals a week is our goal. We need to make a 10 lease renewal offer. It's got to be things we can control. We can't control whether or not the resident accepts that offer, but we need to at least make that renewal offer. Well, if we go through several months where we're doing 12, 15, 10, 18, whatever, and then the weeks, and then the next week we only do 8. Well, we were supposed to do 10, we only did 8. It's going to show that we didn't hit our KPI. So we're going to start looking into why we didn't hit it. But if you start digging into that, you find out that there was only 8 available. There were only 8 leases that renewed that week or that was up for renewal that week. And so based on the timing of when we offered that renewal, we still did 100%, but we didn't get to 10 because you couldn't get more than 8 because 8 was 100%. So it's figuring out how to phrase the thing on the scorecard or scoreboard so that you're actually tracking the right metrics, because your scoreboard should be your at a glance map or read of how the company is performing. So the business owner should be able to look at it. And the way the scorecard we use, if you hit the KPI, the cell turns green. If you miss it, it's red. And so at a glance, you can see, did our team hit their metrics and where are we missing? And so it's important not just to know what to track, but how to phrase what you're tracking.
Absolutely.
So
What's
the next thing, yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Mark.
No, no. So yeah, measuring the right thing also starts with understanding what impact that role has in the company. And one of the hardest things, if anybody knows the answer to this, please share it with me. One of the hardest things to do, I believe, is to measure impact, to measure the amount of trust either built or lost with a client through an interaction, through a process, through a period of time. We try to get close with CSAT and NPS. One of my favorite books is The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey, the son of Stephen R. Covey. And he just talks about when trust is high in a relationship, there's all kinds of surplus dividends paid out to both parties. They know that things are going to happen, and they know there's competence and there's care. And so, for instance, a property manager, if we're going to measure something with a property manager, well, the property manager in my company is the key. They hold the trust of the owner. They own that trust. They own that relationship. So Matthew Whitaker, going back to Evernest, he says that their one number for the property managers is churn. There's a whole lot that goes into churn, right? The problem I have with measuring churn as your one number for property manager is, does that truly measure the impact that we want from property managers? There's churn, and we've talked about churn on another episode, right? There's
Yeah.
churn that's good churn. There's, in fact, if we're not meeting a certain minimum number of churn, we're doing something wrong. We're either not bringing in enough clients, or we're too constricted on qualifying, intaking clients, or we're being too tolerant of the not the right relationship. So for me personally, no criticism intended to Evernest, they're doing a lot better than I am, is I wouldn't measure the PM by churn. How would I measure how do you balance the impact of building trust, doing things efficiently? Here's another example. One of my PMs was on the phone for 45 minutes with an owner talking about something fairly simple. Well, come on, can you reduce that to a 5-minute conversation? Maybe not. Maybe that investment of 45 minutes built so much trust with that owner that we just locked that in as a future property sale for us. We make a lot of our profits through selling properties and helping investors buy other properties. Maybe that 45-minute conversation was an investment that from this point forward, there's far less interaction because they got enough sense of who that property manager is that they don't need to reach out very much anymore. So measuring impact is super difficult and super important. And if we can figure out how to measure impact, then we can reward based on impact. And that's a whole nother conversation, right?
Yeah, you had earlier on in the conversation, I can't remember exactly what you said as far as tracking some of the things, but I think you said something about tracking like speed of getting back to a client or returning the phone calls.
Yes.
And that
Responsiveness.
is responsiveness. So responsiveness is one of those things where we need to be really careful that we don't put things on our scoreboard that we're tracking. And in order for people to hit that, they're meeting the metric, they're being quick in response, but they're not solving problems because we need to do both. We need to be quick and say, hey, I don't know the answer to this yet. I'm going to research it for you. I'm going to get back to you. Can I have 2 days? Would that be okay? Like setting expectations and then making sure we follow up in those 2 days to actually give them a researched, valid answer and not just continuing to, I don't know, or leaving a voicemail or sending an email and just saying, we've got your inquiry, our team is on it. And then we didn't actually spend any time trying to solve it because we were trying to hit our metric of just that responsiveness. So it's this weird balance. And
It's
that's
very,
why we spent a lot of time cultivating and swapping out our items on our scoreboard. So I don't know, have you had a fairly consistent looking scoreboard or do you modify it either quarterly or even when it's time to add? I know there's some opinions around, you don't change in the middle of the quarter or whatever, but um, I think you change directions when you're going off trail, is what I
I gotta
think.
be honest. I gotta be honest, Tony. We've created scoreboards. We've stopped using the scoreboards. We created scoreboards. We stopped using the scoreboards. Then we created, so we've done this multiple times. The problem for me is if they don't drive action and they don't drive behavior, they're not useful. We have
Yeah.
scoreboards that showed us the volume of work we do. Who cares? So what we're trying to iterate towards is getting as close as we can to the impact that matters.
Mhm.
And so I don't have that figured out yet. I don't have that figured out yet. And another word on responsiveness. I feel like communication. So to oversimplify the property management business, there's two big pieces. There's the project management piece, which is onboarding an account and all those tasks and projects live in lead simple, and there's leasing up the property, and there's processing renewals, and there's monthly owner statements. It's the rote, repetitive, predictable, proactive stuff we should just do. Then there's the other half of the business of case management. These are things that are unexpected. maybe can't be predicted. They're coming into us, their phone calls, their emails, their maintenance requests, their non-payment of rent, and these have to be managed effectively to resolution with high competence, high care, high trust. And this is the more, I think this is the more difficult piece of the business to manage and to measure, right? When something comes in that there's no specific playbook for, I've got really good documentation of our processes that we do on a regular basis. We can measure that stuff and we can see, who's doing what and by when, and if it's overdue. The cases, this is where the chaos lives. And this is where we make or break sometimes the trust of our owners and residents.
Yeah, I
So
could see that. Yeah.
so the responsiveness, sorry, I'll get back to the responsiveness comment I wanted to make. So there's three pieces for us when we track responsiveness. It's number one, did we acknowledge every inbound communication, either live answered, within 10 seconds, 95% of the time, or did we respond to every inbound email, chat, whatever, within 1 hour? And then the follow up on that is within 4 hours, did it get to the person that completely owns it, that cares and is competent and is going to drive it to solution? Did the person sending the message hear from that person within 4 hours? So if it needs to escalate to a property manager, there's level 1 and level 2 stuff that can be handled by front lines admin or maintenance coordinators. But if it needed to escalate up to a PM, did that PM send a second message and say, hey, I'm on this? Like you said, like I need 2 or 3 days. Like if we can do that, and then the third piece is that they actually circle back and they close it and it's
Mhm.
done. And we use Help Scout for that. We use a help desk software where we can run reports and show how fast was the first response, how many total responses to conclusion of the case, these different metrics, how many cases did each person close. I think that stuff's really important for this fluid chaos part of the business. That has to be managed in a different way. And I think responsiveness owned by the person that's going to take it all the way to conclusion and then really resolved. Those are huge.
Okay, so let's kind of break down if you'd mentioned, and we've done this too. We'd in the past we'd use the scorecard, then we wouldn't, then we did, then we scrapped it and changed it and swapped out everything on it. And where it really started to click for us was there's two different types of stats that you want to track. And a lot of my coaching or consulting, we use a lot of sports analogies just because it's easier to tell stories and people understand and learn better with stories than they do with just plain facts. So the way we break it down is we kind of look at we have our stats, our team stats and our player stats, and those are just things that we want to track. So maybe we want to track on a monthly basis how much rent we're collecting, just the overall volume. We just want to know, did we collect $1 million worth of rent this month? And it's not really actionable. It's just trending. It's just showing us the trends. So I put that on a separate tab or a separate page. Those are just stats. And then we have actionable KPIs, things that if we did not hit our KPI this week, there is some action we can take that we can make sure that we hit it next week. And I always sort of over dramatize when we miss a KPI 2 weeks in a row, because then I know it wasn't just someone was on vacation, someone was, I don't know, that had a heavy workload because it just happens that it's July and we had a really big turnover of properties. I'm looking at this as a problem. And when somebody misses an actionable KPI, it comes down to three reasons. It's either a system problem, there's something in our system that's preventing them from hitting that KPI. It's a training problem, meaning we've set up the system, but we have not properly trained the person on how to use it, or it's a performance problem. And if it's a performance problem, then that breaks down into two categories. Either the person has the capacity and capability to do it, and they just have elected not to, or they don't have the capacity and capability. If they don't have the capacity and capability to do that role, we may be able to find another role in the company. But if they have the capacity and capability and they've just chosen not to do it, they got to go. We got to trade them off the team because they're just not a good culture fit. We can't have a championship team and have one person dragging everybody else down. It's going to prevent us from performing at that championship level. So when we're putting together our KPIs, we want to stay focused on what is actionable that we can do this week over the next 7 days that will change the outcome of that KPI number.
How do you pull the data in? Do you have people self-report?
Yeah, so it's the old trust but verify. The scoreboard is not for you to report information to your team. You can have one or two. I don't really like when we have the business owner reporting on the KPI or on the scoreboard, but you can have one or two, but really it's for the team to look at their numbers and self-report. Now you need to be able to pull those same reports and you trust but verify. But what we found is if they have to self-report, they're going to start looking into how do I make sure that I'm hitting my KPIs? And then they read the KPI and they read their number, and we can all see were they did they hit the KPI? Were they on track or did they not hit the KPI? So it's really important to give them that time in the spotlight to self-report. Am I performing as part of the team or am I holding the entire team back by not performing?
And then how do you like, okay, so I'm going back to the like the field technician. So they need to get their inspections done quickly, but they also need to be done to high quality. Is there a KPI that measures quality, or do you audit quality in a different way?
Well, that's why I say you might have 3 to 5, right? So you may have um, you give them a certain amount of time to get the report done after the tenant vacates. So on a move out inspection, they may have 24, 48 hours, whatever you set from the time the tenant moves out. So that's a timing issue. Did they get them all done? And then the performance issue, the KPI of did they do quality work? You can have another KPI of number of field inspection reports that got kicked back to the property manager where something was missed or something like that. So you can have two different KPIs that tie together to make the picture clear as to whether or not we're performing with speed and accuracy.
So reports kicked back to the PM. What if the reports just were lacking information? Like they just weren't thorough moving. I'm getting too in the weeds, I know. But this is actually, a
Yeah.
case that I'm thinking about right now
Yeah.
is how do you catch without sending somebody else out? And maybe that's what you do. Like 5% of the time, someone goes and does the exact same inspection randomly. You don't tell them in advance. And so you have two team members, you have a control, and you see, these are done in a quality manner. Or you start noticing a trend where tenants move in and they've got lots of maintenance requests that should have been caught on the property turn, right?
Yeah. I mean, how many times does a tenant move in and there's something wrong and they don't report it? It's not very often. So, without getting too deep in the weeds on each one of the individual KPIs, a lot of this is you're going to be made aware that that report wasn't done on a quality basis. And so then that's where you up the training. You train that person that this was the expectation, this is where you missed, and you train them to know what to do next time to put in the extra data. And now they can confirm when they miss the KPI. You can ask them, is it a system problem? Did you not have the resources to do the report? Because sometimes that's the case. And we own, as a business owner, we own two of the three. We own the system and we own the training. So 2/3 of the time we could miss a KPI, there's something we can do as business owners to fix it. So if we go through those two and the team member says, yeah, we've got the system and we've been trained on it. Now they're kind of backed into a corner. It's a performance issue. And that's where you can really then take that conversation out of your level 10 and have that. But so I want to touch on one other thing, shift gears a little bit with the scoreboard. So I'm going to say something and I'm going to contradict myself. And here's the problem with using the scorecard. So the you want to have things on the scorecard that you need to track to improve, or they're the most important metrics that show that that role is performing and the company is performing in that role, so that you're providing that high level of service that you want to provide, however you define it. So in theory, you would want your entire scorecard to be green, meaning you're hitting every single metric.
Yeah.
But if you, week after week, month after month, you have an entirely green scorecard, you're probably tracking things just for busy work, to pat yourself on the back, to make it look good. Because what you want to do is, once you've gotten into the habit of, we've done all of these things right and we're tracking these, what's the next step? Do we change the number? So for new properties, for our BDMs, if they're consistently bringing in 2 a week, maybe it's time to crank that dial and have it be 3 a week or 4 a week. And so do we adjust the number? Do we adjust the goal? Or do we say, we're performing consistently at 2 or 4, and that's feeding our growth. We don't need to add any more. So what's the next metric beyond that that we want to track? And what else would we add? What would we take off? What would we add? So there's this weird balance of, I always want to see some red, because that means we're tracking things that we need to improve. And I want to see that red go away over time on that KPI line. But I also want to see everything be 100% green. So it's just like coaching a basketball team. Like, you want to see every shot go in, but in reality, that's not going to be the case. So making sure we're tracking the right things, so we're continuing to improve even when we see red.
So not seeing a missed KPI as failure, because the missed KPI could show that we are measuring ourselves to the right standard that requires some striving and some stretching and some growth.
Yeah. And if you start to look at a missed KPI as an insight, it's not positive to miss your KPIs, but I would rather know that we're missing it so I can correct it. So it gives us the insight of, these are the things we're tracking. Here's where we've missed. Now we can have a conversation. Is it a system problem, training problem, or performance problem? And get to the root of, what do we need to fix to be able to change the outcome or the impact of that item that we're tracking.
Yeah, and this touches on something that's really important to me, that I'm really focusing a lot of my thinking around right now, which is, we talked to you when you talked about performance, system training or performance. If it is performance, I'm going to rephrase what you stated in different words. Do they get it? Do they want it? And have the capacity for it?
Yeah.
You know? So the final piece, the capacity piece, is tough, right? Because missing KPIs could show a capacity issue. You start growing, you get into busy season, somebody was gone on vacation. These things are going to impact KPIs, but it's not always exactly clear, that it was a capacity issue. So, and the other part that I have a problem with is, I don't um I don't perfectly know. Maybe it's impossibly possible to perfectly know. I don't perfectly know exactly how much time each task should take, each project should take, and there's nuance. You talk about turning a home, you might need to change your KPI back to your comment about measuring things the right way, taking the right measurements. Should we be saying, hey, we turn every vacant property in 5 business days? Or should we say, we turn every vacant property in 3 business days plus another day for every 1,000 of spend in that turn scope? So I know I'm mixing different ideas here, but the capacity issue and measuring things based on capacity is a little bit more complex in my brain.
Hmm. And that's actually why I don't use the EOS, get it, want it, have the capacity to do it, because there's two different capacities. If you think about, does the person have the capacity to do it? Do they have the mindset? Are they capable of doing it? Do they understand it? Do they
Oh, the
get it?
competence. Interesting. I
The
was thinking
competence,
time.
right? The capacity, I put the capacity back on the system, right? Because if we've outgrown their ability to perform, they're still performing at a good rate, but if we've increased the number of properties under management by 30%, but we didn't increase their resources or the time that we're giving them to perform, that actually falls back on the system, that we need to fix something in the system to make it so that we're performing. So that's why the capacity phrase, the get it, want, have the capacity to do it, can be a little confusing because you do want to focus on the person. Are they competent enough to do it? Do they have the mental capacity or whatever? But you also need to look at, are you giving them the tools and resources to be successful in that role?
I like that. I'd always thought of capacity as having time capacity. Do I have enough time in my day to do it? So I appreciate your insight on, there's two meanings there for the word capacity, not to get that confused. Because yeah, that is a system and a training issue. If someone isn't showing competence yet, it doesn't mean that they're incompetent yet.
Yeah. Well, we've gone on a little bit about KPIs and how to measure team and how to bring people onto your team. And I know we could continue to have this
We
conversation.
should. Yeah,
Maybe we'll do that.
we started with, when you bring people on, how do you make them successful? And then we started talking about onboarding. But then, very quickly we get to a point where we need to be seeing, we need the visibility of being able to empower people, enable them to be successful. So we need to measure things that matter, measure for impact, and then provide the system and the training to let them be successful. I think all too often, and my fingers pointing right back at me on this one, we blame people for screwing things up or not being smart enough, when really, and this is a really empowering thought too, we are the core issue. It's the
Yeah.
system and the training that we either have or don't have that significantly impacts whether we can leverage through other people.
I want to close with one other comment that kind of ties into this. Maybe we can go into this in another episode a little bit deeper, but there's been studies around why people leave a job or why they stay. And, money is a little bit of a factor because you got to have your needs met, but we all have different expectations of what our needs are. We all have different lifestyles. And so once we've sort of met those needs, then it becomes, what else are we getting out of the job? And there's been studies about, a lot of people will leave a job, they leave bad managers, they don't necessarily leave companies. And one of the reasons they leave bad managers is because they don't get the feedback. They never know, am I doing a good job or am I not doing a good job? And by rolling out these KPIs, it gives everybody the same understanding of what it means to do a good job. And a lot of team members, I've got clients that their team members have given feedback about the KPIs, about the way things are written on the scorecard. The example I gave earlier about 10 lease renewals and only doing eight, but eight being all 100% of what was available. That was actually a real world client example where that team member said, hey, we need to change the way this is worded because I've given you 100% and it's saying that it wasn't good enough. And so they start to take ownership of it and they start to want to be able to show the rest of their team, I'm doing a good job, I'm performing. And so it's it's work to put these KPIs together, but it bonds the team. It gives everybody that understanding of, look, we're making progress, or look, I'm performing, or it gives you a way to do your evaluations for your team members, not just, hey, you're doing a good job. Well, thanks. I kind of appreciate that, but I don't really know what I did that made you say that. So now I'm second guessing, what do I need to do to hear that again? And so, tying together the psychology of employee employment relationships along with the scorecard and measurement is really important.
Ooh, I love that last piece you said there with you're doing a great job. Well, thanks, but I'm not really clear why I'm doing a great job. That's almost anxiety inducing. It's like instead, hey, you hit this and it's measured this way and that's on track and I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
That's
Specifics.
you can take that to the bank and know that somebody's not manipulating you. They're not vague. You have a clearly understood business relationship, clear expectations, and that would boost morale and retention, I would think.
Yep. All right, let's wrap it up. Are you going to go out for a run later, or did you get one in this morning?
I need to go on a run. I need to go on a run. What
Yeah.
about you? What's your next run?
Well, I went this morning. I only did 4 miles, but it was 2 miles out and back, and it was over 2,000 feet of vertical gain in the
Oh
first
my
2 miles,
gosh.
and then 2,000 feet of descent in the 2 miles back. So that was
That's
a
a lot.
good,
If you 1,000 feet in a mile, that's some vert. Nice
yep.
job.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Uh,
See you on the trail.
stay on the trail. Oh, I like that. Stay on the trail, and we'll be here waiting for you at the next aid station.
And it's a wrap.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to the Property Management Success Podcast. We'll be back with another value-packed episode to help you level up your property management game. If you've got something valuable out of today's episode, please share it with a friend or colleague, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so you never miss out on future insights and strategies and tactics. Until next time, here's to your success.